In this video, I hope to show the repair and restoration of a Hammond Chronmaster clock. This is built in the 1930s, and I received it in a non-working condition. The listing that I saw said that it was plugged in but didn't run. I don't know if that's because there's no power going into it, or if the rotor is frozen, or if the owner didn't know that it was not a self-starting clock. What I did notice with it, which is for me very unusual, it's the first one that I've seen, and I've restored several Hammond clocks. This one has come with the original cloth-covered power cord, and it's very delicate and fragile, and the connection of it on the back is in such poor condition that I don't even want to plug it in. I'm afraid it'll short out, who knows. But one thing I can do to check to see if there is an intact wiring is to attach a ohm meter to the plug and see if current is going through it. So flip this on. Just touch the leads to the plug. And you can see numbers flashing, which means that wiring is intact. And I probably could plug it in and give the start knob a spin and see if it works, but I'm a little reluctant to do that. So the first thing I want to do is open it up and try to remove the power cord and then see how everything looks. The first step is to remove the 3 screws that are holding this plate to the back of the case. Once that's out, the whole clock should come out through the front. So let me take those out first. I'm noticing that these screws are all very loose. None of them are really tight. There you go. Now this is for sure the first time this clock has ever been taken apart since the day it was built. I've seen several that have had new power cords already attached, and you could see new connections of the wiring, so someone had opened them up in the past, but not this one. A couple of things I'm noticing here. One is there were some lock washers underneath the screws. A couple of them fell off. But I have all 3. They go with the 3 screws. And in other clocks designed like this, I've seen a cardboard gasket around the mechanism, but this one is metal. So I have to unclip it, probably bend this little tab here, and to remove this. This also has a spring clip that holds the front, the bezel, the rim, to the face. And to remove that, it's very hard to see, but there's a little bitty gap right over here. And you need to get in there with a little sharp instrument and pry this spring out. And it's just a big circular spring, it'll just pop right out. But first I'm going to try to get this gasket off of it, and then we'll come back. And that's partly because once that's off, I hope to be able to visualize the wiring here and see if I can figure out how to disconnect it first. The gasket came off so easily that I stopped so I could show you just how easy it is to get this thing off. Just bend up this little tab, pop that off. And it's out. Next, what I want to try to do in viewing the wires here, I see one cord going here. I don't know if this is a split with two cords. This looks like possibly some glue to keep that gasket attached. But if I can push the wire out of the housing, the little slot here that it holds, already the little black plastic grommet that's crumbling to my as I handle it. But let's see if I can push this out. And it's out. So that's encouraging. This part of the wire here is pretty intact. And I can see the two wires here where it splits. And at some point I'll probably just have to undo the knot. And if I can remove the insulation here, this will be a good spot to reattach the power cord. So next though, I can leave this for now and work on taking off the ring that's holding the rim. I'll try to show how to get this off. I'm not sure how easy it'll be for you to see it, but what I use, it's actually a couple of dental explorers. You need something sharp and stiff that's not going to bend, and you need two of them. Where's the little pop? Here it is. Here, I got it out a little bit. Hopefully you can see that. You can see how it's removed here. There you go. Next step is getting the rim off. There's usually little tabs that are bent somewhere holding this in. Although sometimes it'll just pop right out. And that seems to be the case. Here's the rim, the glass. Put that aside. And what I want to do next is remove the hands, because I don't want to damage them by keeping it face down. So let me get set up to do that. The first thing is I try to pry off the second hand. It's held on with just a friction grip, very tight fit. I try to just pry up gently with a couple of screwdrivers. This one's pretty tight, and I never want to force it. So what I'll do first is take some WD-40 and spray it into a little cap that I have. And then with a paintbrush, I'll just dab it around the stem of holding the second hand. And I'll give that 5 or 10 minutes to let it penetrate, and then we'll try to remove it again. The WD-40 has been soaking for about 10 minutes, and we'll see if it's any easier to take off the second hand. It's still pretty tight. It's moving a little. Very little. Got it. Okay. Now there's a small nut that holds the minute and hour hand on. And we'll see how easy that comes off. If it's too tight, I'll just apply some more of the WD-40. Yeah, it's pretty tight. I'm not going to force it. And we'll put some more WD-40 on it. And we'll give that a good 10 minutes or so. The WD-40 has been soaking now for 15 minutes. I gave it some extra time. We'll see if we can get the nut off, and I'll see if this makes it any easier to turn. Very good. That's a tiny nut. Wow, don't lose that. Here's our minute hand. And you'll notice sometimes they're bent a little bit. And that's usually, the bend is downwards so that it's not hitting the glass. The curvature of the glass is going over it concave. So you need to make sure you're putting these back on the right way. Same thing with the hour hand. Try to pry it up. Careful. Great. This is real tight too. I'm going to have to reapply the WD-40. Let's add some to my cap here. And we'll give that probably 15 minutes as well. What I'm noticing, and that I'm not too happy about, is that the paint around this dial is flaking off very easily. And I want to try to prevent worsening it, so I'm going to put a piece of cardboard to protect it as I try to pry up the hour hand. We got it. Now this should come right out. There we go. I'm going to look to clean this up, but I have to do it really gently. I mean, the paint is just flaking off at the touch here, and I would like to preserve this as best as possible. The next step is going to be to remove this front plate from the back, and that will let me access the gears. What I might try to do is set up, and if I'm careful enough, I think I can plug it in just to see what happens. So let me give that a try. Okay, what I've done here is I temporarily placed the second hand back on. I plugged in the wire. And now I'm going to give the start knob a spin. And it's running. Now, if this power cord was in a great condition, I could probably clean it up and close it up and be done with it. But I'm going to have to open it up and get to where the gears are. You can see them turning in there, because that's the only way I'm going to be able to replace the power cord. So the next step will be undoing these 3 screws on the front of the plate. And this is the part that I always recommend taking photos of each step that you take apart. That way, when you're reassembling everything, you'll see exactly how everything goes back together. So let's unplug it. Take off the second hand. And I'll loosen up these screws and then we'll come back. One other thing I wanted to mention before taking off this plate is that there are notches in the sides of it, 3 of them, and they correlate to these little tabs on the dial, and it pretty much only fits in one way. Once you've taken the plate off and everything comes apart here, it might be a little confusing which way to put it back. So what I like to do is I will mark the top of it where the 12 is. So the 12 is up here, so I'll put a mark here. The next plate underneath also lets me know it's the top and the bottom plate. So when I put it back together, this is where the 12 is, this is the top. Now I can undo the screws and take these plates apart. The screws are removed. I'm going to lift off the top plate. The next plate is what holds all the gears in place. So I have to just gently lift this up and out and trying not to disturb the positioning of all the gears. I'll try to do it slowly. If there's an issue where something is stuck, I'm going to have to sometimes use a little WD on it, because I don't want to be pulling the gears out when I lift this up. But let's see how we do here. Well, that came off pretty good. I do believe that everything is positioned properly. So what I'm going to start doing now is I'll actually take a photo of these positions of these gears, and then I will remove them one at a time, taking a photo of each step. Normally, most of these Hammond clocks that I've repaired have a sealed rotor that leaks a lot of oil and gunks up these gears. This particular one does not, and as a result the gears are quite clean. If it wasn't for having to replace the power cord, I wouldn't have even had to open this whole thing up. But let me get set up and start to take the gears out, and once they're out, then I can deal with the power cord. I want to show you something different about how these gears are placed in here. And although I've restored a lot of Hammond clocks and the steps to do it are pretty much the same, it seems I always come across something new with each one. With this clock on the back, the set knob and the start knob are attached. I imagine a friction grip type thing. They're stuck onto the stem on these gears. So as a result, I cannot remove this. This one is permanently attached, as is this one. And it would be a huge effort to try to take these off. As a result, really the only gear that I've been able to remove from here is this one. I can't really lift this one out because it gets hung up under here, and I don't plan to try to force it or angle it in such a way that would make it really hard to get it back on. The good news is because this unit doesn't have an oil-filled rotor to power it, the gears are relatively clean. I see a little bit of debris down in here, and what I can do is with a small toothbrush I'll get in there and brush that out. Another thing is that I've tried to understand how these clocks work, and what I know is that the coil here, when the current goes through it, it generates a magnetic field. And when I talk about the oil-filled rotors that I've seen on most of the other Hammond clocks, it looks like this. This one's no good. And the magnetic field causes what I refer to as a flywheel type of a gear on the inside of this to rotate, which spins the output gear, and that's what makes everything else go. What I've noticed on this clock, because it does not have a rotor, is the pieces here with these little teeth sort of, there's one here and in here. I think that the magnetic field that goes through here is what causes this particular gear to rotate, because when I looked at it, that's very much what the flywheel type gear that's in here looks like. So somehow they were able to make it without having to have the oil get all over the place, because they always leaked out of the rotors. Anyway, I'm going to work next on removing the power cord. What I started doing was scraping off the insulation off of the wires here. And a concern that I have as I was manipulating the wire here is inadvertently breaking it off of the coil, because if that happens, then I'd have to get a whole new coil and wire. So what I did was, using a bit of Gorilla Tape, tape the wire to this little metal bar here. So now as I move this around to trim it and cut it, etc., I'm not going to disturb the connection here at all. What I've done is I cut the wire and I undid the knot in it, and I've stripped the insulation off of the ends here. And before attaching the power cord, what I'm going to do next is clean up the gears as best I can and then just reassemble the whole plate assembly. Once all of that is back together, then I'll come back and we'll put on the power cord. I put the gears back in place, seated the plates, and screwed everything back together. Marking where the 12 goes made it real easy to position these correctly. The trick to doing this is, as you're seating the plate with your fingers, you need to guide the gears into the little holes where the tips of the stems fit, and it takes a bit of doing to do that. Once you think you have it in though, and it's screwed together, if you give the knobs a spin, you should be able to see the gears turn, and let's see if I can show you that. That's the start knob, you can see them turning. And the set knob, I think you can see that they're turning as well. So it looks like everything is properly positioned. The next step is going to be to attach the power cord. I was able to come up with a pretty old power cord that had a Bakelite plug on it, but it's a plastic one, more modern than that cloth covered one, so it'll be safe to use. So we'll put that together and then I'll come back. I've attached the power cord, but I did not have enough room here in order to use the little leather sleeves, which would have been nice because the wire has to be bent in order to tuck it in here, and I couldn't bend those. So my plan is to tuck the wire in here, and then I'll be securing it with the ring, the gasket ring sort of. Once that's in place, then it's just a matter of cleaning up the dial and the glass and putting the hands back on and reassembling it and putting it back into the case. So first thing I'll do is get this wrapped around here. I've tucked the wire in and secured the whole thing with the gasket and placed some electrical tape to hold that in position, so that's not going to go anywhere. And when I said that the next step is to place the hands back on and the dial and the glass and then back into the case, what I want to do first though is carefully clean up the dial, clean up the glass as well, and before I place it back into the case, it's rather beat up looking, and I have a few products to help restore the wood, and I hope to blend all of this stuff out and it should come up looking pretty good if all goes well. So I'll be dealing with all of that part next. I've cleaned the glass and polished the metal trim, the knob on top, the feet, the rim. If you recall, I'll show you the original spring clip that came out of here. All of this metal was the same color as this dark ring, so it really came out nicely. I just used Noxon. It works great. Next, I'm going to be cleaning and polishing the wood case. I also cleaned up the clock face. I just used a bit of Dawn dish detergent, some warm water and a toothbrush, and very gently went over it, and I managed to not flake off any more of the paint than what was already gone. So that's looking as good as we're going to get. You can see how beat up the wood case is. A lot of scuffs and scratches. There's a lot of dirt on it. I'm sure that'll have to be cleaned off. And a couple of the products that I use to restore the wood includes, it's Howard's Restore Finish. This is great at getting rid of a lot of the white scratches that you see on wood. And once it's been treated with this, I then use, it's the same company, Howard, it's called Feed and Wax. And it's just a wax to go over the wood. And that's what we'll do next, and then we'll compare it to the before. I've completed the work on the case, went over it with the Restore Finish. It turns out that the scuffs on the top were scratches in paint. This top was actually painted, so I sanded all the paint off, went over it with the stain and with the wax. And it turns out the solid wood, this is actually a veneer over the wood, and there were a couple of areas where the veneer was peeling off, so I had to glue and clamp that together. But all in all, I think it came out looking pretty good. And the next step is going to be to put the finial and the feet back on. Okay, the finial and the feet are back on. The next step is to put the clock face, the dial, and the hands back on. I'll set up those parts and show you how we do that. Okay, first we put the clock face back on. You recall I marked where the 12 goes. Okay, that's in. Next, you have to synchronize the clock. So temporarily, you're going to put the minute hand on first. It only fits one way. And that way is here. Okay, once that's on, you're going to turn it to the 12. Then remove it. And then we put the hour hand on the 12. Next, I'm going to put the minute hand back on, and then with this little nut, I'll secure it that way, and then the second hand. I put the minute hand on, tightened up the nut. Now we'll put on the second hand. Okay, next we have to put on the glass and the bezel, and then the ring. All right, everything's in. I just have to manipulate the ring next. We'll see how easy that is, hopefully. It wasn't bad at all. Very good. Now it gets placed back into the case. Tight fit, but we're in. And then we place this locking plate back over it. We just have to secure it with the 3 screws and we're done. The screws are in and I've plugged it in. We'll give it a spin and see if it runs. There you go, the Hammond Chronmaster. This was a fun one to restore, and if you've enjoyed the video, feel free to check out some of my others. I have other clocks I've done in a similar fashion. That's it for now.